And we say a warm welcome this afternoon to Justin Urquhart Stewart.
Nicholas, good afternoon and thank you. What a great afternoon it's been. It was fascinating listening to your talks earlier, and it's great listening to Liz Barkley as well. She is one of those most inspirational people when it comes to dealing with the common sense of finance, and particularly when it comes to managing small businesses, which of course politicians never really understand. Now, some of them claim to be involved in business, but you do sometimes wonder really whether they got their hands that dirty. As I'm sure you already know, definition of running a small business is waking up at 2:30 in the morning in a cold sweat. Wonder if you've still got one. I think we
Justin, I'm going to just to interrupt you slightly. Sorry, we've got a slight issue with your camera, which suggests that we have a talking piece of wood, and you're no talking piece of wood. So I think you need to reverse the camera or something because we can't see you.
Yeah, well, you're not missing anything, but I'm quite right. I shall now reverse to try and do that. How about that?
There you are. That's better. Thank you.
I think you're better off with the wood, actually, but no matter. So forgive me. I've just moved house. So I'm in my shed at the moment. And to everybody as well this evening, please be careful. The weather looks like it's going to be absolutely appalling. So having just got drenched a couple of hours ago, please be careful, everybody. So, as I was saying, the issue with regard to small businesses and the pain that you have to go through, and that's why I'm so pleased that someone like Liz is there to really talk some common sense as to what's going on. So what I want to do today, if you wouldn't mind, is actually just having got through this past set of issues, I wouldn't say disaster because it's continuing on, we've now got to prepare for the next stage. And I was going to say prepare for the next stage, but of course much of it actually happened overnight anyway, when we had the next variant being announced in Southern Africa. And we see the knee-jerk reaction from various politicians. Whether it's the right thing to do or not remains to be seen. But what we need to do is learn how to manage our businesses during these different areas. And what can we learn from this and adjust from it? The advantage you've got as a small business actually is we are able to adjust and change. Larger businesses, those behemoths, find it far more difficult to do so. And those of us who worked for large behemoths probably don't want to go back to doing that because we know how much they can fail. The future belongs to the small businesses, the ones that can identify, change and adjust accordingly as necessary with this. So let's just paint a background to what's going on. First of all, after what's happened over the past year or so, the global economy is still growing at around about 5% a year. That's actually the long-term average, which, considering actually the global economy has been through this huge, great heart attack, is really quite encouraging. Now, there are obviously variations within that. And of course, that recovery, that growth, has been because governments reacted really very quickly indeed, faster than I thought most of them actually would, in terms of providing various different ideas. For instance, our government coming up with the idea of furlough schemes, C-bills and all sorts of things. Now, some of these worked, some of them didn't. There'll be accusations of corruption, things going wrong. But actually, in the heat of the moment, that was actually what was necessary to actually see action being taken and being effective, protecting jobs, giving people, remember, the one word that runs any economy. And it's not called Peppa Pig or Boris. The one word is actually confidence. If you don't have confidence, you don't set up a business. Confidence, people don't buy anything. And that's what's so vital. And then, frankly, that's all I ask of our politicians. Intelligence doesn't really come into it, but provide us with enough confidence, real confidence, that actually we can start building our own personal economies based on something more sound. So let's have a look around the world and see actually what's been going on. The United States economy is actually growing. In fact, its figures are slightly better. A couple of months back, I was looking at my notes, it was showing signs of stuttering rather strangely. We thought it would be picking up faster. But in fact, it looks as though the figures have had to be revised and the employment figures had to be revised really quite strongly. And of course, there's rather strange things that's happened in this recovery. People have been employed again, but then actually an awful lot of people not being employed, not enough people there to be employed. A significant portion of the workforce in the States, as we've seen over here, has decided not to go back to work. And frankly, nobody quite understands why yet. Is it because they don't need to, don't want to? But we'll have to see what happens. But what you've had, though, is the American economy showing signs of recovery with that. Where's the primary driver of the American economy? It's Mr. and Mrs. Joe Schmo shopping in Walmart, living in Little Rock, Arkansas. And if Mr. and Mrs. Schmo are happy, then the American economy is happy. And on the basis of that, probably the world economy is going to be all right. Why? Well, because remember, the American economy is based on the consumer, and the American consumer is so powerful, it really does affect everybody else. So we must take notice of it. And the American consumer is in quite good heart. Despite what's happened, actually, the American consumer's got quite a lot of money, as of course as the British consumer, because although they bought far too much ridiculous stuff from Amazon, actually we didn't go on holidays and other large bits of expenditure, and some of us may have tried to build extensions and things, but there's a shortage of bricks and other bits and pieces, so you probably haven't been able to do that either. So people are sitting on quite a lot of cash at the moment. Does that mean they're going to blow it all? Well, I hope not. Does mean, though, that actually, at least in a position where there is cash, as opposed to actually just actually finding themselves in a desperate shortage. So actually, the US economy will, as a result of this, find itself recovering. And the question is now, following this huge infrastructure bill that's gone through, courtesy of President Biden, well, thank heaven we've seen the back of Mr. Trump, or have we? Well, we've seen the back of him as president for the time being, but certainly his influence is still there. But now we've got Sleepy Joe, and I have to say he does appear somewhat sleepy, to say the least. His 80th birthday, something occurred to me actually, that Clinton is only 79, and he left the presidency 20 years ago. That's the age difference you've got here. Whatever Bill was, he wasn't sleepy. He was doing other things. Enough of that, we'll move on. So the question is, therefore, can actually the Biden regime get this bill, actually had got it through Congress, now actually see it through, and what impact it's going to have? People have compared it to the Roosevelt New Deal. And there's a lot of comparison there. The trouble is when you say a trillion, no one actually knows what a trillion is. You can't put it on a calculator. Well, it was 3 trillion, and now it's 1 trillion. It still doesn't make much sense to us. It's just a huge number. Can America afford it? Well, if you're printing your own currency, the answer is yes, you can, so long as everyone believes you. For the time being, at any rate. But actually, a bit like the New Deal, it's not so much that the money gets spent, because the New Deal itself, actually probably about half the New Deal was actually spent. It was actually the confidence given that the fact the government is going to be, we're spending money on infrastructure, on the highways of the nation, and all those other bits and pieces, to which then private interests said on the back of that, well, we'll support that, we'll invest as well. And so you saw the recovery. If you were being very cynical about it, you'd say actually the Second World War probably helped. Well, it probably did, but we won't spend too long on that, because I'm not suggesting that we actually enter a world war to try and recover from this, nor do we have to. But nonetheless, this will provide that sort of support that the economy needs in terms of government energy to actually encourage others to go with it. The overall, though, what you've seen, the economy, as you've seen in terms of, particularly in terms of technology, the technology giants really dominating what's going on, certainly dominating the investment market overall. And of course, running into this big problem that America does from time to time, its companies get so successful in key areas and they become monoliths and behemoths. And so whether it was the steel industry, telephone industry, television, all the various power companies and things like that, they ended up being broken up because the antitrust laws or monopoly laws that the Americans have. So the question is, will the same happen to Facebook, or whatever we have to call it these days, and Google and the others, because they are so ubiquitous? And I suspect the answer is yes, something will be done. But equally, are they going to do that in the face of behemoths from China who are not going to be broken up? The Chinese will make sure that they're strong ones will be getting stronger. So it's an interesting question as that the Americans want to do. Do they actually want to be seen to be fair and break up the monopolies in the face of overseas Chinese monopolies? So let's talk a bit about China. We've got the arguments about between China and America going on the whole time. Well, of course, Trump hadn't got a clue how to deal with China. He's no diplomat. If I'm being polite, you call him an idiot, because dealing with the Chinese, you don't do so by shouting at them. What you do, of course, is in the Orient, it's all about face. You reach agreements quietly behind closed doors, and no one loses face, but you reach your agreement. Shouting at each other doesn't get you anywhere at all, and certainly not with the Chinese. The truth is, the Chinese and the Americans need each other. They will shout, bitch, and moan at each other the entire time. But they're in a symbiotic relationship. They can't do without each other. Why? But who is the largest holder of American debt? Well, actually, it's the American government. But leaving that aside, who's the next largest? And the answer is, well, sometimes it's the Japanese, but sometimes it's the Chinese. The Chinese own an awful lot of that debt, and the Americans need them to keep on buying that debt, or at the very least, keep holding it. And of course, the Chinese need the Americans. Why? Who's the biggest trading partner for the Chinese? The Americans. So they do need each other. But the problem is now, things have changed in China. President Xi is turning himself into what looks more like Emperor Xi. He's broken the traditional rules unofficial rules in China, how the Communist Party ran things. It's had one wing and then the other wing who swapped power every 10 years. And there was a reasonable balance of power within the Communist Party. As far as he's concerned now, he's now on the basis of saying it's his party, he's going to run it his way, and it's Mr. and Mrs. Xi who are going to be the real power brokers in that. And so it's going to be interesting to see how that one actually now plays out as China starts asserting itself more, asserting itself in terms of companies. You can see that with Hong Kong. China has no interest in maintaining an independent Hong Kong as an open trading place. It's got lots of those as far as it's concerned. It doesn't want them that open. It'll open them as far as it wants to under its control, not on a quasi-independent regime brought about by an old colonial power from 100 years ago. Also, remember, China has a bit of history behind it. 100 years of humiliation. 100 years of humiliation. Go back to the 1840s and 1850s, where Britain fought 2 opium wars against China. Because the Chinese were producing opium. No, actually, we were producing opium in India, and we were forcing the Chinese to buy it, who didn't actually want to buy it, but we said, you must buy it. Frankly, we made Colombia look amateur at it. We were far better at actually doing drug trading and forced the Chinese not only to buy our opium, but also give us Hong Kong on the basis of it as well. It's a bit of our history we tend to sort of gloss over a bit. But it wasn't just us. Belgium, Austria, Hungary, Japan, America, everyone was nibbling at China. And then you follow that by the humiliation of the Civil War and, of course, the Second World War with Japan. And as far as China is concerned, there's a certain amount of payback going on here. So, China will be continuing to grow, but it's actually what you're seeing now is some issues in terms of growth, because if you are seeing a slowdown in demand from growth from other areas of the world, it will affect China. And the Communist Party is a selfish partner. It wants to make sure it has total control, and it can have control because so long as the economy keeps moving. When the economy stutters, then you start seeing more social unrest, which doesn't really get reported in the West at all. Well, it doesn't get reported at all. So we have to find out only some time later. Don't believe all you're being told. The EU has an interesting issue to try and deal with. It appears to be somewhat leaderless or rudderless. Mutti Merkel's stepping down, and we now find another German politician. Name one. Yeah, not easy, is it really? So we'll get used to him, but nonetheless, hardly a starring partner on the international stage. Monsieur Macron, of course, would think it's going to be him. The rest of the EU probably doesn't want it. So the EU at the moment is feeling rather lost. And also the EU's got a big problem. The Visegrad group, which is Poland, Slovakia, Czech Republic, and Hungary, they were a group of Eastern nations in Europe who said very clearly, look, excuse me, we weren't run by Moscow for 50 years to have it replaced by Brussels 50 years. We want those powers brought back to us. Do you mind? Had Mr. Cameron been paying attention at the time, he'd have realized that actually what he was asking for was round about what they were asking for too. But he didn't really seem to pay attention. And actually, those tensions are now coming to the fore again, as you see in particular with Poland, as to who has overall power. Is it EU law or Polish law? Well, actually, it's EU law. But the issue is there. There are real strains within the EU at the moment. And until they get that really sorted out, having unified agreements on things is going to be very difficult indeed. Management by committee is never easy. So it's going to be fascinating. Also, ask the question, what about the euro? Is that currency going to survive? Well, in my view, it's quite clear. No, it's not. We have a single currency in this country, and that depends upon the fact you've actually got harmonized banking system, banking regulation, free movement of capital, and the same fiscal structure. Not the same taxes, but basically the same fiscal structure. Now, and you may find the Cranky's love child, or sorry, Mrs. Sturgeon actually in Scotland may have different taxes, but basically it's the same structure. And so what you'll find is that we can run that single currency like that. If, however, they break away and have a different fiscal structure, sterling itself would find it very difficult to operate like that. So same also with the euro. It doesn't fall apart straight away. It may take 10, 15 years, but the fundamental flaws are there unless they get resolved. There are lots of other areas of the world we can talk about. I won't go on too much about that. But my own part of the world is down in ASEAN, the Southeast Asian nations. And here you can still see very good economies which have been badly hit by the pandemic, but have been bouncing back. Because again, the rise of the Oriental consumer is showing great power in their expenditure. Meanwhile, back in Blighty, that remind you of 3 numbers for Blighty. 5. We're still the 5th largest economy by way of GDP. There are different ways of measuring it. GDP is roughly the best way of doing it. We're not about to get overtaken by the French, about to get overtaken by the Indians, the Indian economy. And I should actually spend some time talking about that, because the Indian economy itself is still growing very well, and its tensions with China are still very significant, whether it's in whether you're dealing actually with Kashmir, which is not just a Pakistan-Indian problem. Actually, China took 20% of it. I think the direct papers on it says the translation is to look after it. Always nice to be looked after by the Chinese, after the Tibetans. And there are also border disputes with in Sikkim and Assam up in the northeast border as well. But I'll leave that for the moment. So we've got these three numbers I want you to remember about Britain. 5, we're still the world's 5th largest economy. 8, according to the BBC, we don't make anything anymore. That's interesting. We're actually the world's 8th largest manufacturer. And I find it fascinating, particularly when you talk about places like Sheffield. And even in Sheffield, people say, well, we don't make much steel anymore. The value of steel produced in Sheffield is now significantly higher in real terms than it was 40 years ago. Okay, so you don't have big smelting plants anymore. No, because they're doing high-end engineering of steel. Quite rightly, so they should be doing. Low-end production of steel is quite difficult to do, actually, with the sort of cost base that we've got. Doesn't mean necessarily you have to abandon it altogether. That's an interesting strategic issue, so whether you should have it or not. But the top end of it certainly is what we need to have, and it's very valuable. We do make a lot of stuff. I know we focus on car production, things like that, although most of it's assembly. Our real strength, actually, of course, is in technology. Look at the technology hubs around the country. That funny name we have to give it, Silicon Roundabout, Silicon Gorge, apparently that's Bristol, Silicon Beach, that's Brighton, Silicon Fen, well, you know what that one, Silicon Glen, all sorts of other silicons I'm sure you can have. But we're very good at this technology and developing it. And we start, as we were hearing from Liz, the number of startups we've got in this country is remarkable. When I was growing up donkeys years ago and having to do with incredibly pompous mother, who was far too tall, I only ever met the bottom half, and she would sort of go on to my various brothers and sisters, endlessly inquiring as what we're going to do with our lives. And asking me, what do you want to do with your life? I said, well, I'd actually love to have my own business. To which she said, oh my God, you want to go into trade? Did you realize we have a separate door for that? A bit unfair, I was only 10 for God's sake. But it does sort of sum up, I suppose, British middle-class attitude towards people in business, in trade. Because what do people do? They worked in the services, they work for the government, they work for a large corporation, or they may have been a professional, doctor and accountant or something like that. But did they have their own business? Ooh, no, not really. And so it really wasn't there. Now, of course, actually, most people do seem to be very keen, and it's a brave thing to do. Some, again, as Liz implied, get it foisted upon them because they get, well, been asked to leave. You get the ubiquitous consultant, which is a euphemism, of course, for an unemployed banker. They're all over the place. But of course, other people found themselves in a position where they actually had the bravery and strength of character to say, I will go and do this on my own, albeit with a group of others. To me, an entrepreneur isn't just one person. An entrepreneur is a group of people all trying to actually do it together. You can't do it literally on your own. You need other people with you. It's very simple in my found. You actually surround yourself with people who are far brighter than you, which in my case is very easy. And therefore, you try and grow it that way around, because you've all got different skill sets. And that's why it's so important in smaller businesses that we use each other as this grouping together. Now, as you can see in terms of the slides you've got for this, actually, how we all link together our various strengths and abilities. That's, I think, so exciting about those small businesses. So the good news is we're setting up more businesses than Germany and France put together. And we're good at doing startups. Where we're rubbish, and we are rubbish, is actually financing the next stage. Where do you go? The thing I've always gone on with Liz about in the past is we don't teach people in this country about finance. People leave university with tens of £1,000s worth of debt with not diddly squat what to do. I left university with debt, and I didn't even borrow any money from the government, for God's sake. I got it free in those days. I still managed to get myself into debt because I was irresponsible. Now people, far more responsible than I, leave with tens of £1,000s worth of debt. How are they going to pay it back? It's not even cheap debt. We don't teach people about finance, and it should be taught from the word naught onwards, in the same way as people should be having saving from the naught onwards. But it's not just that. Who teaches us in business about finance? Where do you go to for finance? And it's very difficult. People end up using finance from whoever was selling it to them. Was it a bank? Or was it a private equity, venture capitalist, or some crowdfunder or something like that? And what's right for you? So this is where we need to take some reform, because perversely, actually go back 45 to 1945, which I know none of you go back to 1945, I'm pleased to say nor do I. There were 45 stock exchanges in Britain. Can you imagine that? 45 stock exchanges full of gits in red braces. And most of them were utterly useless. But there were 7 which were pretty good in the usual centres. Glasgow, Edinburgh, Leeds, Newcastle, Manchester, Liverpool, Bristol and Birmingham. Is that it, I think? And the purpose of the stock exchange is to raise local money for local business. That's the whole idea. And they sort of forgot that. In fact, if you said to the London Stock Exchange, what's your purpose in life these days, they would not come up with that as an answer, which to me would say they're probably not a stock exchange. They've sort of forgotten what they're there to do. In Glasgow, in fact, we started up in that period. We actually were doing more retail business in Glasgow than we were in London, for rather perverse reasons to do with settlement, but no matter. We actually started a little market there, and it was a market for actually raising money for 3 or 4 software games companies. Now, admittedly, software games companies in those days consisted of not much more than ping pong, frankly, but it was very exciting in those days. So we started this little market. So when the London Stock Exchange wanted to go and shut down the Glasgow Stock Exchange for reasons best known to itself, it found itself stuck with this annoying little market, which it could have just crunched up. But we made enough noise about it, they had to keep it. They had to give it another name, they rebranded it, and they thought, well, we'll move it into the main market in due course, and then we'll just forget about it. AIM was born, the alternative investment market, and for a while it's quite successful. But the London Stock Exchange laid more regulation on it, more costs on it, and some not necessarily very good advisors on it. And it's now expensive. So we don't have a mechanism for providing equity finance, really, for cost effectively, for growing companies. So we've got something, part of our financial plumbing is missing, and that's what we need to put back. This is all something which we constantly need to question the entire time, because nothing's ever perfect. So as technology goes on, there are better ways of doing things. So for smaller growing companies, yes, of course, you've got banks you can go to, but banks aren't really there to provide capital for you. In fact, they're not there to provide capital. They provide you with debt, maybe medium-term debt. They're frankly there to provide cash flow, and not always very good at that either. But where else do you go? Venture capital is too short-term and probably won't come down to that sort of scale. Private equity, they want their money back in 3 years or part of your body, whichever is cheaper. And then on-sell it again to another private equity firm with a bit more debt, your debt. So if I'm being slightly cynical, because I am, there are good private equity firms and venture capital firms, but there are also some real dogs out there as well. And the trouble is, when you're running a business, you don't know one from the other, which one is a pedigree and which one's a mongrel. And so that's the issue. We need to actually educate ourselves about different types of finance and different types of business. Good heavens, people can get swindled at all sorts of levels. You only have to look at, well, the factoring business, which Mr. Cameron found himself getting connected to, Greenswell or Horseswell or Pigswell, or whatever it's called, which is just a factoring business, but was frankly cheating. If anyone had bothered to look, discounting invoices that don't exist yet. Oh, that sounds right, doesn't it? And that was at the centre of our government. Anyway, so it just shows, don't think of the fact you don't know about all these things. It's hardly surprising, because very few people do, because we don't spend time educating. Hence, what you got with Eagle Lab and the groups coming together there, teaching us different ways of doing it, may not all be right for you, but at least you have an understanding of what to try and do. And I think that's really rather encouraging. There was another number as well I wanted to mention for you, and that was 15. Britain doesn't export anymore. Well, actually, we do. We are the world's 15th largest exporter. We used to be the 9th largest exporter. We've been going down the list. Why? One of the key things was actually one of the banks I used to work for. Barclays DCO, Dominion, Colonial, and Overseas. Shows how old I am. Comes complete with a solar topi. Send you off to Uganda to go and get, well, I'll leave that behind. But anyway, the point was they focused on trade. And you don't do international trade on the side. You have to really focus on it, because they're really tedious things like documentary letters of credit. You want to watch paint dry? Try and do that for a while. The banks gave it up. You go to the big trading centers, like the Slough Business Unit. You go to the Slough Trading Center. You go to it's the business park. I think it's the biggest business park in Europe. And there are 1 or 2 banks on it, but they don't do international business. They do credit cards and overdrafts, for God's sake. If you actually want to do some things like documentary letters of credit, that's a head office function. Now, luckily, some of the chambers of commerce have taken it over, but nonetheless, we need to do more of it to try and do that. So these are issues where there are strong things that we must remember actually we're not that bad at, pretty good at, in fact. And this entrepreneurial attitude that we've got is great, but we need to repair, rebuild, replace the financing system to make sure that gets better. Now, what can we learn from what's been happening over this? And there are some key issues that throw up opportunities for us. One, supply chain. For those who've been to business school and had to suffer lectures from people about how inefficient we are and we need to have a Sigma 6 efficiency, I think it was Toyota introduced that one, which was basically get yourself so super efficient that everything is delivered just in time. So you pull the elastic so tight, it's brilliant until bang, the elastic goes. And that's exactly what's happened. You didn't just have a supply chain, you had a really tight supply chain. A whole series of things, including one ship getting stuck in the Suez Canal, and the capitalist system starts to collapse. It's ridiculous. So what are companies doing? The answer is they're de-risking. I will now find a local supplier. That does not mean I'm going to be making iPhones at Isleworth anytime soon. What it does mean, though, is that actually there'll be local elements which I'll pay more for because they're local. That provides us with opportunities. And actually, I think that's fascinating as companies start looking around saying, what else can I try and do to actually make things locally and have other element areas which I can support? Also, in terms of the taxation system, we need to have more reform on that. It's not so much that things like EIS is bad. EIS is very good, except I want the letter R in front of it saying regional EIS to get more regional investment going on. Capital gains tax. Why do we have really creative capital gains tax, which long-term investors, by which I mean not 3 years or 5 years, but 10 years and 15 years, your capital gains free, to help with your family finances and things like that. We've got the most incredibly complicated tax system. Tully's Tax Guide, I think it's about 15,000 pages. It's basically a book that accountants take to bed for some form of sexual entertainment and enthusiasm. They're sort of like that sort of thing. But actually, it's got more complicated for it. Good God, we have income tax, national insurance, which is the same thing, virtually, getting more complicated. We've introduced another level now, and VAT. Those are the two main taxes. Corporation tax is relatively small in comparison. And after that, we're down to a load of sin taxes. So there's a lot more we can try and reform from all of that. But equally, those tax breaks we should be using as well for the best we possibly can and all of that. So that I'm quite encouraged by. We ought to be also having more than 100% relief on investment. To also, that would certainly help productivity in those sort of areas. So the refinancing, the restructuring, the opportunities coming out of the pandemic, I think are certainly there. And I would also say, well done for being brave and having your own business. Sometimes it works, quite often does work. Sometimes it doesn't work. Don't worry about it. Have another go. It doesn't always work. And that's a great thing. Be prepared to get it wrong for some time, but as long as you're doing the right thing in the right way, that's okay. But also think about, you're not just doing it for the business and doing it the right way. Because again, it was something Liz mentioned, we talk about those letters now, ESG, environmental, sustainable, and governance. Companies will be doing this. Now, some of it will be greenwash. But now you're also getting some people telling us, I'm only going to invest in that company if you can prove it's got the right level of governance. What are their payment issues? Is it a 30-day payment? Are they paying that or are they not? And are they reporting on it? And also in terms of their behavior, in terms of its employees, in terms of diversity, all of those elements, which are absolutely crucial. Standards of behavior, doing the right thing. We started at 7 Investment Management, my last business, so it was about in 2002, 2003, a sustainable portfolio. And it wasn't wildly popular because no one's that interested in those days. Ethics was a county in East Anglia, didn't really understand it. But it got more important. Now, actually, many more people are turning around and saying, I want my portfolio smack in the middle. I want properly well-governed ESG portfolio in here. I do not want sin companies in here. Mind you, definition of sin companies and sustainable varies hugely. We don't seem to have any oil companies anymore. We now have energy management companies who will be carbon neutral, data in the future, which by that time we get there, you will have forgotten, we hope. So it's fascinating to see how this changes. It is, though, and making ourselves as smaller growing businesses already the right way to behave with ESG as part of our DNA. Another set of initials, I do apologize. But that, I think, is really exciting. And they'll be the ones that will attract more finance. Why? Because they're doing it the right way. Do it the right way, you'll get more attention. Do it the right way, you'll get more investment, you'll get greater trust. Sometimes you'll get private equity and other people offering you more money to maybe do it the wrong way. And it's brave to turn around and say, I don't want to do that because I actually want to stick to doing it the right way, even if that means I'm actually going to get maybe a lower price for my business. A pain I felt I had to go through. But at least I can sleep at night, because I know the business that was there is now being run by the right people and not by people who are just going to be carrying out some sort of financial rape of the business and people's hard-earned money. In financial services, that's a really important issue. It's a huge privilege to look after people's money, not a right. So please take from this. One, the global economy is still growing. We're going to have to live with what's happening in the pandemic. It'll be back time and time again, as you saw last night. The markets reacted today, inevitably, because they won't get frightened again. And so what happens is we have to just go through to the next stage. There will be other changes with regard to the jabs that we have to have. But we learn to live with it and adjust as necessary. Then what we find is that the economy changes because of the levels of risk. That throws up opportunities. We need to make sure we have greater awareness of how we fund ourselves and how we work with each other in our infrastructure of other smaller businesses working together. The technology allows us to do things we wouldn't even thought possible 10 years ago, even 5 years ago. There's more of that to come. The behemoths will still be there, but there will still be the smaller ones as well. The opportunities are there for all of us to be able to use. May I wish you great success, and really bear in mind, keep asking questions. There's no such thing as a stupid question, just many stupid answers, particularly from someone who's probably spent the weekend at Peppa Pig World. Thanks a lot. Good luck.
Thank you very much indeed, Justin, for your time this afternoon. Just a couple of questions that we want to sort of fire at you, really. In your line, but your personality, whenever we've seen you on TV or we've read you, you sort of exude a certain confidence, a positivity. I wonder, though, with your experience in finance, whether you ever could have imagined a situation of the last 2 years when lockdowns started to happen. We actually saw business stopping, being mothballed. Have you ever imagined that business would have faced such a challenge?
Never like that. In terms of, all the books you saw of telling a dystopian future, how that might occur, you thought, well, that may be the case. The nearest I felt we got to it was after the banking crisis, when you saw the interconnection of the octopus that was Lehman's, that could pull down so many other areas, not actually directly connected with Lehman's, and lose that confidence. That really did frighten me, because then you could see just how fragile this system really was. So seeing what we've seen with the pandemic is something completely new. But the encouraging thing is, look at this, we've been through this for 2 years now, and the economy is growing. We're here, we're doing things, we're managing our way through it. And look over the next few days with the change of the variation we've seen coming out, and see how the economies react again. And we're beginning to live with it, and that's the best we can try and do. There is no perfect single answer. My people who will be succeeding on it, it won't be the large corporations, because they're the ones that actually find it very difficult to adjust and change. Yes, of course, Facebook and Amazon are ubiquitous. But actually, it's going to be the smaller businesses underneath that have the ability to smooth and to adjust as necessary to it. And that I find exciting. But no, I didn't see that happen.
Justin, thank you so much for your time. We've got the awards to come, of course. We've got some music as well. But I know Alex wants to officially thank you and wrap up your time with us today. But from me, thank you very much. Alex?
Superb. Thank you, Nick. And thank you, Justin, for your rapid, energized synopsis of what's going on in the world. I found it truly fascinating.